All right, age I think is a no-brainer, we'd say. What about allowing some differentiation in experience rating? That is, what people hate about experience rating or pre-existing conditions is what about the guy they say, well, geez, you just had cancer, you're likely to come back, $100,000 a year is going to be your premium because that's what it says. I mean, on the other hand, telling one group they're going to pay $5,000 and another group's going to pay $3,000 or $8,000 and $4,000, I guess the reason I think about it is if you're really going to charge somebody that much of a premium, they've lost a lot of insurance. There's a lot of insurance that you're getting by having your premiums capped. Allowing some differentiation doesn't really seem to me to violate the principle of having insurance too much.
It depends on the pool, I think, right? So let's suppose you're going to insure diabetics that are all age 55. That pool is sufficiently large that there is some smoothing that's going on. As long as within that group of people, there's differences in how much they have to spend in that given year. But it is true that as you more fine-grainedly priced, you're getting less of the pool because there's fewer people in any particular category. So the insurance value is going away. And the other thing that happens is something that's called repricing risk, which is what I was talking about with auto insurance, is that you and I are healthy today. Tomorrow I get sick, my premiums go up, yours won't go up. That's also a source of risk, another way to think about this. Now we have a solution to that question. I think actually we have a solution that might address both of them. There's an old idea, a colleague of both of ours, John Cochran, talked about this back in the 1990s, the idea of long-term insurance contracts. So you and I, back when we were 25, would both sign an insurance contract that would last for 20 years, but that would be keyed to our health condition at 25, which is a little bit closer together and still uncertain. Now that, by contract, achieves a lot of what community rating does, but it's a little bit more stable in the sense that there's no way for me to get out of that contract without facing contract penalties. And we can make that system work. You see a little bit more of that in some other countries like Germany, but the United States hasn't moved to that. But that would allow us maybe to split the difference, allow us to have experience rating that's stable, but also not to have repricing risk.
Another way to think about it is, and John talked about this in his work, there's a couple ways to do it. One is to actually sign these long-term health insurance contracts, kind of like a life insurance contract. Exactly. I sign it when I'm 25, and I pay every year, and it maybe front-loaded in terms of payments so people don't drop out. But whatever it is, it's a long-term deal. The other way he talked about it is premium insurance, that you kind of insure against having your health premium goes up. So I get diagnosed with a chronic illness, my premium goes from $4,000 a year to $12,000 a year. In John's world, you would buy insurance
against the premium
that would cover that $8,000 of adverse health premium that you'd have to pay.
And that becomes identical.
And insurance companies could say, okay, I'm going to insure you against getting diabetes. If you get diabetes, your premiums will go up, but I'll pay some of those premiums for you. In exchange for that, of course, everybody who's at risk to begin with is going to have to pay a little more for their insurance. Yeah. That's the idea.
And by the way, if that premium insurance policy is not community rated, but it's experience rating, it just collapses back into that long-term contract written when you're 25, let's say.
But we don't need to have a long-term deal. We could have a series of these short-term deals with built-in insurance.
That's right.
So do you think we should be looking to move in a direction like that?
I think it'd be great. I think there are a lot of economists that would agree, health economists in particular, that would agree that that's a good idea. It's hard to implement. It's not hard to implement because companies couldn't do it. They know how to price long-term risk with life insurance. They know how to risk rate. They've done that with car insurance. I think the only issue is whether or not the legal system could tolerate a 25-year contract. It might require us, for example, for your insurance not to be done through your employer. So employment contracts don't last 25 years because people churn. If your insurance is attached to your employment, of course, then insurance will churn too. But if we can get you to separate those two things out, buy the insurance separately, like you would do for auto insurance, separately from your work situation, I think you can have these long-term contracts. And courts have to be, it requires a backbone by courts, right? So for courts, they have to be willing to enforce the penalties associated when people try to leave their long-term insurance contracts.
This is where your law training and law experience is going to come in, because as an economist, you're always frustrated when people always look at the world after the fact. And they say, well, geez, this is unfair. Shouldn't we let this guy out of the contract? But if the courts are going to behave that way after the fact, one big thing economists worry about is then you're going to make the contract no longer work up front.
Yeah.
If I told everybody that when the outcome's against what they want, they can just drop the deal, well, then they're never going to get the upside.
Yeah, that's
because
right.
if they can't take the downside, they'll never get the upside.
Yeah, but then here a legislature can come in knowing that courts have a difficult time enforcing these contracts against us, an individual, could devise a vicarious liability scheme, which is if you buy a contract from insurance company A and then you leave and then you move to insurance company B, they could make company B liable to A for the breached contract by the beneficiary, by the insured. And that's a way to make it so that, when it's two insurance companies battling, court's a little bit less sympathetic and less likely to think from an ex post view rather than ex ante view than when it's an insurance company versus an individual. So I think we can get beyond that. It does require some desire to move to that sort of outcome. It would be wonderful to see that, but I think it will require a little bit of a lift on the legislative side.
But we see some of this in lots of other areas, like product liability and things like that, where this failure to realize the full consequences of what you do after the fact is something that was harder to deal with than you might think as an economist. That it's a real problem that people tend to think, well, geez, isn't the best thing for me always to give me a great deal?
Yeah.
And the answer is no, because then nobody will do a contract with me.
Yeah, no, that's right. That's right. We see this through, I know we're talking healthcare, but we see this throughout the law, which is, efforts to modify loan agreements ex post lead to increased interest rates for people up front trying to get loans, so it reduces the amount of access.
Well, just they don't get insured, they don't get loans.
Yeah, or products liability, giving them ex post insurance against product failure increases the product prices ex ante, so fewer people can buy products. To some extent, that might be good if people are not very good at, it's costly to write contracts, and that's the contract that they would have written already. But it's not obvious that courts know what the optimal contract is. And so that ex post manipulation can be problematic. I think there are debates about whether or not legislatures ought to do that because they have a better capacity of assessing this, or agencies. But I'm not sure courts are in a great position to do that.